Hi everyone, this is Sandy Alt reporting from the wild, and this is the audio podcast companion to my blog on Substack. This is episode 19, SUBTYRANNY Homesick Blues. This week I have a story from the wild that has haunted me for years, and it has come up for me again because of current events in our nation. In rapid-fire succession, I've seen 3 sickening scenes from Horror America, the country we handed to avaricious demons to run. These 3 landmark incidents sound a sequence of debacle sirens for democracy, and I'm going to show you how like the terrifying tale from the wild our situation is. But first, let me line out the events that prompted me to recall that story. 1. A devastating natural disaster. The precious, irreplaceable lives lost from the flooding Guadalupe River in Texas created a fresh tragedy wound when the raw rents from other recent climate cataclysms in our country have not yet healed. The latest layers of loss are stratified within the sedimentary record of DOGE cuts to NOAA and the National Weather Service, with Trump failures to provide FEMA assistance to afflicted states for calamitous damage and loss, and with the enormous Republican-endowed increase in funding for the government agency meant to help and heal our nation from events such as this, yet all of these funds are earmarked for doing harm and creating cruelty. This coming on the heels of the HHS Trump Gnome Master Blaster's promise to kill FEMA. 2. Truckloads of human beings arrived at a new inhumane Instagram influencer set, lavishly decorated with captive immigrants, cages, and full swamps around, so that the soulless sadists can do performative Holocaust play before cameras in the costliest and hyped to be harshest concentration camp in the swamps of Florida. On sacred tribal homelands and over the objections of the indigenous, where the sepsis of previous massacres and heartbreakingly brutal inhumanity still infects the environmentally sensitive area. The corporations hauling in the riches for inhumanely housing the poor victims of this barbaric crusade toasted to their victory, capturing billions of our tax dollars for their already bulging bank accounts, while the people in need in our country go without. And 3. An exercise in savagery to prove the tyranny takeover is total, when a convoy of merciless masked immigration agents in tactical battle dress, carrying rifles, on armored vehicles and on horses, surrounded a peaceful park in Los Angeles where no incident had provoked such an invasion. Innocent children at a summer day camp had to be spirited away to protect them from the trauma of seeing the Terminator maneuvers. Martial law suppresses America's second largest city, with the threat from the demon at the resolute desk that New York is next.
We're going to straighten out New York. Maybe we're going to have to straighten it out from Washington.
And
we could run D.C. I mean, we're looking at D.C. We don't want crime in D.C. We want the city to run well. We're thinking about doing it, to be honest with you.
Fascism fairly roared out of the closet in that rant from the Oval Office. 1 minute we had a democracy, and now we don't. Instead of the red, white, and blue, now it's the SUBTYRANNY Homesick Blues. And that, the way something good can turn bad really quick, that's what reminds me of this haunting story from the wild. It's a tale about the perilous plight we put ourselves in when we fail to exercise good judgment and the precipitous price we pay. At midnight one autumn night, my fire radio erupted as dispatch toned our department for a rescue. A car had gone off the road and into the river. The mile marker location told us this had occurred at the treacherous stretch of cliff-edged county highway at a switchback in the canyon we called Dead Man's Curve. The good news was that the river ran close alongside the road there, and the drop down from the tarmac was not that steep. The bad news was threefold. It was freezing cold outside. The river there was full of boulders the size of tractor trailers, and our crew didn't call it Dead Man's Curve for nothing. Nearly a full complement of our less than 24 volunteers responded that night. Our small mountain department had to make do with only 3 vehicles. One was an ancient water tanker, which wouldn't be needed for this rescue. The other 2 were scaled-down engines, one of them a command vehicle, specially built to fit into the residential-sized garage bays that were part of our tiny firehouse. Those 2 vehicles left the station immediately. The incident was not even a mile away, so the rest of us went directly to the scene. 2 of our firefighters hiked about a quarter mile, one in each direction on the highway, and set out flares for the traffic coming up or down the mountain. I got out the slow traffic signs to use at the scene perimeters, and the traffic team prepared to guide in law enforcement and ambulances once they arrived. The chief asked me to stand by with my Jeep in case we needed someone to head back to the station to set up a chopper landing. It was pitch dark in that curved section of canyon. The crew parked the command vehicle crosswise on the road as close as possible to the edge of the asphalt. Its lights illuminated a small car that had crashed into a giant rock in the rushing river, its front end nearly underwater, its rear above the surface a foot or so. The car's engine and part of the hood had smashed through into the driver's compartment. The metal on the side that we could see was so misshapen that the doors would not open. There had been 4 teenagers in the car, but one had crawled out a window, got up on the road, and gone far enough out of the canyon to get a connection to call 911. In those days, our small rural volunteer fire department was not lucky enough to have a Hearst rescue tool, more commonly known as the Jaws of Life. Lacking this immeasurably valuable hydraulic device for prying and cutting through cars, we were forced to use a Halligan tool, which is like a crowbar with one forked end and another with a chisel and beak. It's designed for forced entry, but using it required exerting massive pressure upon the target, which could destabilize the vehicle and send it careening downstream or under the current, or punch through and injure an occupant. 6 of our firefighters waded hip-deep into the swirling water, their headlamps illuminating the frightened faces of 2 young people in the back seat, one of them banging on an intact section of otherwise fragmented window. 2 of our men went to the more submerged side of the vehicle and soon returned to the operational side, shaking their heads. The car rocked slightly from side to side as the water surged around it. One of our longest-serving firefighters, a big muscular man named Pierre, stuck his head inside the partly opened window on the driver's side of the front seat. He was talking to the trapped occupant as he moved his head around to direct his headlamp. I could see the beam of light sweep over the pale face of a young woman, disappear into her lap, and then move across the seat to the other side, where the dashboard and frame from the opposite side of the car had caved in. 2 firefighters pulled the winch line off the command vehicle and attached it to the car to keep it from being swept off the rock and down the river. Once they'd managed that, they teamed up to try to pull open the doors on the uppermost side. Pierre took off his bunker coat and hurled it towards the bank. He reached one of his big arms in through the narrow opening of the driver's window and groped around for the door handle. It wouldn't budge. After that, he squared up his shoulders and bent so that his headlamp illuminated the woman's face again. He talked to her softly. Her skin was blue-white, likely from shock, fear, and the cold of the water. She nodded slightly. 2 of our firefighters worked on the back door with the Halligan tool and a crowbar to pry the passenger door open. It was starting to budge. But Pierre moved away from the driver and spoke to the assistant chief, who waded back to the bank and told me to race back to the station, wake up the neighbors who had a big open area in front of their house, and set up a landing zone for a life flight chopper. In less than 20 minutes, I had set out lights on 4 sides of the open field, placed cones on the nearby road to restrict traffic away from the zone, and the captain on our team had joined me to signal the chopper pilot from the ground for the landing. We set up a lantern at his feet, aiming upwards to illuminate his hand signals. We had just over a quarter moon that night, barely enough light in the mountains to allow for the flight. Our remote valley had only 3 street lamps along the county highway, and none on the residential graded gravel roads. All this is to say it was dark, and the pitiful amount of lighting we had set down to mark the landing zone was not going to be enough. I went across the road to where I'd parked my Jeep, and I pulled it right into the edge of the field and turned up the high beams to add a light path. The captain had come from the crew in the river just after me, and as he peeled off his soaking bunker gear, he gave me an update.
We got the 2 kids out of the back seat into the ambulance. They don't seem to be critically injured, a little banged up and probably suffering hypothermia, but the driver is seriously injured, and she's well and truly trapped. When we couldn't pry that door open, Pierre just stood up and worked his jaw back and forth beneath that big bushy mustache of his, and then he drew in a big breath and grabbed hold of each side of it with his hands and yanked it off the frame. We all just stared at him for a moment in disbelief. It was incredible. They were cutting through the steering wheel when I left to come help you guide the chopper in.
And right on cue, we could hear the distant sound of thumping in the sky, and then, as the bird drew nearer, the flatter sound of thwacking as the pilot began to hover and then center over our improvised heliport. As the chopper began a near-direct descent, an ambulance pulled up alongside the edge of the road, and the EMTs got out and opened the back doors to get the gurney holding the young woman who had been driving the car when it went off the edge into the river below. At the debrief, we learned that the kids had been at a party up the highway northwest of our valley. The young woman who had been driving was in life-threatening condition when we arrived, and we all knew that without Pierre's incredible show of strength and valor, she would not have survived at all. Though immobile, she had still been conscious when we helped put her in the chopper, and that was in large part due to Pierre's time-saving, heroic act, as well as the hard work of the rest of the team. On those narrow, twisting mountain roads, to drive after dark was fraught with hazard, especially through that part of the canyon where the road could be icy when other parts of the pavement were not. Younger and less experienced drivers driving through without keen awareness of this, perhaps even distracted or driving too fast, were a recipe for disaster. We responded to enough accidents there to know. And too many times, instead of a rescue, we sadly performed a recovery when the victims didn't survive at Dead Man's Curve. I am going to tell you why this story is haunting me now. Those of us who have been awake and aware of what's going on have been forced to look at all the loopholes in our democratic system of government that have been exploited by the Project 2025 Trumpian oligarch regime. And we can see a similar setup for danger that existed in my tale of that night at Dead Man's Curve. For a self-governing system like our democracy, we have not had enough awareness of the potential destruction or enough guardrails. Hazards have been allowed to encroach on the free flow of good governance. The public has practiced careless ignorance of the warning signs. And most of all, too many voters in the country voted to speed along towards disaster without putting on the brakes when things began to spin out of control. How did we get wrecked on this rock of ruin with the freezing, swirling waters of greed, corruption, sycophancy, oligarchy, and tyranny overtaking us without any way to get out? Where do we start? Do we go back to Reagan? Even before? Definitely let's cite Citizens United in part for the wreck we are in now, because that decision gave the power of the vote to the wealthiest, who began to seize more and more control of the mechanisms of our government. When Mitch McConnell and his Senate syndicate of court-packing power grabbers failed to convict Trump and remove him from office after January 6th, insisting that the very courts they had just filled with unscrupulous and unqualified democracy demolishers would step up and do the job, they failed to remove a destructive driver from behind the wheel, leaving no one else enough control to put the brakes on a deliberate demolition derby attack on democracy, the rule of law, and the principles of the Constitution. When Merrick Garland and his DOJ didn't hasten to prosecute Trump for his crimes, they allowed him and his corrupt cabal to keep steering the United States into the danger that has landed us here. And why were 49% of those who voted willing to vote to put Trump behind the wheel again after they saw the insurrection on January 6th? Had they drunk too much of what's served up from the Fox News toilet? Were they too zoned out? Were they just plain irresponsible and caught up in the self-centered grievances he exploited? I suspect it's some of all of this, and more. Let me take you back to my story from the wild to tell you what I know about what happened next. The young lady who had been driving the car was rushed to the nearest trauma center by the life flight crew. She had suffered a serious spinal cord injury. The 3 passengers in the car were hospitalized for contusions, abrasions, and hypothermia, but released from the hospital in a few days. And that was all we knew about the victims of the tragedy that night on Dead Man's Curve. For a while. But in a few months, we had visitors come to the station, and the chief asked me to be there with him to greet them on the day they came. The visitors were the parents of the girl for whom we'd set up the landing zone. The young lady Pierre had pulled the door off the car to save, the one we had all hoped and prayed for as we watched the chopper fly away into the dark sky above our mountain valley that autumn night. The mother told us,
she was an honors student at the University of Northern Colorado. She's continuing treatment and therapy at a special facility for spinal cord injury survivors, but her recovery has been slow. Her spine was injured in 2 places, at the neck and near the base. We are still holding on to hope, she said with tears in her eyes. Her husband put his arm around her as he said,
"We wanted to come to thank you for saving our daughter's life."
I could see the fear behind his eyes as he spoke, understandably. The father added,
"The prognosis was completely uncertain. The odds were against her full recovery. But she hung on by a thread for a while, and then she began to show improvement, reigniting our hope that she will one day walk again and live a full life, or at least be able to sit upright and function well from a wheelchair. She's getting the best care and treatment."
They gave us a check, a donation towards the purchase of a Hearst rescue tool, the Jaws of Life, so that we could more easily and quickly save another life when the need arose. And they promised to keep us apprised. A few months later, the parents sent a note by mail, letting us know their daughter was still unable to walk yet, but had graduated to a wheelchair. They expressed thanks again for saving their daughter. I want to add something here that has nothing to do directly with the story, but bears telling. Just a year or two after this incident, our friend and heroic fellow volunteer, Pierre, who was a bastion of selflessness, strength, ingenuity, decency, humor, goodness, and devotion, passed beyond the ridge of this world and is now hopefully somewhere in the heavens we like to imagine for those who gave so much to our lives and to this world. He did not die from anything related to this incident, but rather from a terrible bout with pneumonia, one which came for him in the midst of his joyous life, exemplifying service and community. Our department, his friends, and his beautiful wife, who also leads a life of extraordinary service, his young son, his family, and our whole community were devastated at the loss. And I mention this because I want to honor him for his part in this story, a part he played in many other stories like this over the years he served his community. He saved the life of the driver of that car, and he likely saved many other lives over the course of his own too short time on this earth. As I think about him now, as I tell you this tale of the risk and the loss that parallels the story we are living together, I see Pierre throwing off his bunker jacket, drawing up superhuman strength, and pulling the door out of that wrecked and crumpled car to save the life of someone he didn't even know. We can all benefit from the inspiration of Pierre's willingness to go to any lengths to save what was precious and irreplaceable. We all can be inspired to teamwork, to putting whatever skills we possess to work together, doing everything we can to save the nation we love before it is swept away. We're teetering on a rock, hoping to survive, needing a miracle, trying to effect our own rescue. The courts, the Democrats in Congress who are fighting without the tools they need, the volunteers and citizens across the country who are giving whatever they have, doing whatever they can do. Will it be enough against the chilling torrent of surging tyranny? Will it be in time? With news like we've had these past few weeks, I worry how our nation, the country I love, will survive. It's hard not to succumb to the sub-tyranny homesick blues. I miss the America I knew when we automatically responded to disasters and didn't think of saving lives as a political issue. I miss the America I grew up in as a service brat, where people of all colors served together and where we were seen and acted as the good guys among people of our neighboring nations. And growing up in a military family, I miss seeing those in uniform, even those bearing arms, as protectors of our nation, not as invaders seeking to dominate and rule over American cities. When my dad wore his dress blues, I felt proud. Not at all like the sub-tyranny homesick blues I feel seeing the 3 events from the news that I mentioned at the beginning of this post. And then, the other day, I woke up from a dream about that night on Dead Man's Curve. And I figure, if a tiny crew of poorly funded, under-equipped, but dedicated volunteer firefighters could save those kids that night against all odds, maybe we can do this for democracy too. I'm guessing Pierre wouldn't even think twice about it. This has been Sandy Alt reporting from the wild. Every week or so, I publish a written blog on Substack, and then a few days after, I produce a podcast version like this one. You can read and subscribe to the companion blog to this podcast on Substack at sandyalt.substack.com. And you can see a photo of Pierre and one of me with a helicopter in the background at one of our improvised temporary helicopter landing zones there. My grateful thanks go to the great Michael Clarkson for his voiceover as the captain of our volunteer fire department, and to Tim Currington of my production team for the voice of the father. Also, to the amazing Emily Suyat for the voice of the mother. You can hear Emily on her podcast on Substack, Red County, Blue State. And thanks also to 2 of the content creators on my production team for helping me refine this script, Teresa Dowse-Weber and Eric Brody, who publishes the Substack blog Decency and Sense. Be sure to check it out. And if you want more stories from the wild, look for my Wild Mystery series in book, audiobook, and ebook. You can start with any book in the series and go wild.